Ayn Rand stands as one of the most influential intellectual figures of the 20th century, particularly within libertarian and individualist circles. Through her novels and philosophical essays, she articulated a comprehensive system, Objectivism, that offered an uncompromising defense of individualism against the collectivist currents of her era. While her ideas helped shape aspects of the economic liberalization of the 80s and 90s, they also contained notable tensions. This essay examines both the enduring strengths of her philosophy and its principal shortcomings, with particular attention to the inconsistency between her ethical principles and her political conclusions. Rand presented Objectivism as resting on four foundational principles: the primacy of objective reality, the supremacy of reason, rational self-interest as the moral standard, and a laissez-faire capitalism as the moral social system. Rand insisted that reality exists independently of human consciousness. Existence exists, she wrote, and A is A. This Aristotelian stance rejected subjectivism and the notion that collective desires or political decrees could alter facts, economic laws, or physical constraints. In economics, this translated into a clear rejection of the monetary illusion. Printing money does not create wealth, only production does. Wealth is not a fixed pie to be redistributed, but a value created by individuals through effort and ingenuity. This metaphysical realism remains a powerful corrective to contemporary tendencies toward narrative-driven policy and claims of entitlement This metaphysical realism remains a powerful corrective to contemporary tendencies toward narrative-driven policy and claims of entitlement untethered from contribution. A rock is not conscious. It does not perceive reality. It simply exists. You, however, are a conscious being. Consciousness is the faculty of perceiving reality, of being aware of existence. Every conscious entity, human, animal, or artificial, possesses an identity and perceives reality according to its nature. Existence exists. Reality is independent of any consciousness. It is not a dream, a simulation, or a matrix. Existence is primary. Consciousness has identity. It is not a passive mirror or a distorting veil, but an active faculty with a specific nature. A is A. Things are what they are, independent of anyone's wishes, feelings, or beliefs. We do not live in separate subjective realities. We live in one objective reality. We perceive reality directly through our sense organs. The change from object, energy, sense organ, nervous system, brain, is causal and lawful. There is no unbridgeable veil of perception. Our senses do not create or distort reality. They respond to it according to their identity. Illusions, such as pencil appearing bent in water, do not invalidate the senses. They demonstrate that reality includes specific causal relationships. In this case, the refraction of light. The senses report facts. It is our later conceptual identification that must integrate them correctly. The senses are reliable because they are the product of millions of years of evolutionary tuning to this reality. They provide the irreducible foundation for all knowledge. Modern neuroscience confirms the mechanism, transduction, neural processing, but does not refute validity. The brain's construction of a perceptual model is not a fabrication, it is integration of real data. The model corresponds to reality sufficiently for survival, science, and technology. To claim the senses are fundamentally deceptive while relying on them to make that claim is self-refuting. There are three levels of awareness. 1. Sensation. Automatic detection of stimuli. Objective. 2. Perception. Automatic integration of senses into percepts. Objective. A dog hears frequencies we cannot. A colorblind person misses distinctions we see. These are quantitative differences in range, not different realities. Physics operates identically for all three. These are quantitative differences in range, not different realities. Physics operates identically for all. 3. Conception. Volitional integration of percepts into concepts, principles, and theories, where error and subjectivity become possible. The first two levels are automatic and objective. Only the conceptual level introduces the possibility of error, because it involves choice. Subjectivity has a proper place, but only at the conceptual level. Taste preferences, liking or disliking fish. Subjectivity has its proper place, but only at the conceptual level. Taste preferences, liking or disliking fish. Subjectivity has a proper place, but only at the conceptual level. Taste preferences, liking or disliking fish, reflect a subjective evaluation of an objective fact. The fish's Taste preferences, liking or disliking fish, reflect subjective evaluation of an objective fact. The fish's chemical properties. Borderline cases, when red becomes orange or a town becomes a city, reflect fuzzy boundaries inherent in reality or in our chosen definitions. They do not collapse objectivity. We can and do discover phenomena beyond unaided senses. Infrared, ultraviolet, ultrasound, quantum effects, through instruments and reason. All such discoveries remain part of the same single reality. There are no separate planes of existence. The question, but how do you know you're right, when used as a blanket objection. The question, but how do you know you're right, when used as a blanket objection, is self-contradictory. To claim man can be wrong in every instance, one must already know what right is. Total skepticism is performative. It steals the very concepts, knowledge, truth, error, it seeks to undermine. Man is neither infallible nor omniscient. He is fallible, but capable of correctness through proper method. Error is possible precisely because truth is possible. The proper response is not doubt, but validation. Conscious beings validate knowledge by logically grounding conceptual conclusions in direct sensory evidence, integrated without contradiction. This means, start with perpetual facts, form concepts by identifying similarities and differences, test higher-level abstractions against reality, reject any claim that rests on feelings, faith, or arbitrary assertion. This method is the foundation of science, logic, and rational philosophy. It renders subjectivism, postmodern relativism, and simulationist escapism untenable. We can know reality, we must choose to know it. Existence exists. Consciousness perceives it. Reason is a tool. Objectivity is not only possible, it is the only valid path to knowledge. For Rand, reason, understood as the faculty of conceptual identification and logical integration, is humanity's only reliable means of knowledge. She opposed faith, emotionalism, and appeals to authority as substitutes for rational judgment. While she acknowledges sensory evidence, her emphasis leaned rationalist. Valid concepts and principles could be derived through rigorous thought. This commitment placed her in opposition to both religious dogma and the later rise of postmodern relativism. As she demonstrated in works such as Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, clear concepts and logical consistency are prerequisites for effective thought and action. Rand's most provocative contribution was her moral defense of rational selfishness. She argued that the individual's own life and happiness constitute the proper moral purpose. One should neither sacrifice oneself to others, nor demand that others sacrifice for oneself. Virtuous action consists in pursuing one's rational values through production and voluntary trade. This egoism directly challenged the altruistic ethics dominant in both religious and secular collectivist thought. In Atlas Shrugged, she illustrated the consequences of a society that penalizes the productive and exalts the unearned. Creators withdraw, and the motor of the world stops. Her insight that human action ultimately proceeds from personal valuation retains considerable explanatory power. Rand viewed laissez-faire capitalism as the only system consonant with reality, reason, and self-interest. In Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, she portrayed it as a system of voluntary exchange, in which individuals deal with one another by mutual consent, trading value for value. She contrasted this with statist systems that rely on coercion. Her depiction of heroic creators, Howard Roark, Dagny Taggart, John Galt, embodied the possibility of achievement when unhindered by bureaucratic interference. Despite these strengths, Rand's political philosophy contains a significant internal contradiction. While she condemned initiated force as immoral, she endorsed a minimal state possessing a monopoly on retaliatory force, funded ultimately through taxation. She argued that anarcho-capitalism, the complete privatization of defense, arbitration, and law, would lead to chaos and competing warlord agencies. In The Virtue of Selfishness, she dismissed market-provided protection as the absurdity of competing governments. This position sits uneasily with her broader principles. If competition and voluntary exchange are superior mechanisms in every other sphere of human activity, it is unclear why the crucial services of rights protection and dispute resolution constitute an exception. Later libertarian thinkers, notably Murray Rothbard and For a New Liberty, demonstrated that market incentives could discipline private defense and arbitration agencies more effectively than a coercive monopoly. Historical and contemporary examples, private security in commercial districts, competitive arbitration in international commerce, and community-based protection, suggest that polycentric legal orders are feasible and often superior to monopolistic ones. Rand's fear of private coercion mirrors the very mechanism she otherwise criticized in government, the potential for abuse. Yet governments have compiled a far longer record of systematic rights violations, from mass democide to regulatory predation. Her vision of a strictly limited state, restrained by objective law, underestimates the dynamics of power. Institutions granted a monopoly on force tend to expand, as evidenced by the growth of the American state from modest constitutional beginnings to its present scope. Voluntary funding mechanisms proposed by some objectivists, lotteries, user fees, do not resolve the fundamental issue. The state's claim to ultimate authority rests on coercion. Furthermore, Rand's formulation of the non-initiation of force principle, while sound in itself, loses consistency when paired with mandatory state financing and enforcement. A philosophy that begins with the sovereignty of the individual should, by its own logic, reject any institution that claims partial ownership over persons and their property. Herein lies the central paradox of Rand's system. Herein lies the central paradox of Rand's system. She championed individual sovereignty, voluntary cooperation, and the rejection of unearned claims, yet stopped short of applying these principles comprehensively to the realm of political authority. She correctly diagnosed the moral and economic failures of collectivism and altruism, but retained a residual attachment to the state as an indispensable protector. In doing so, she left her philosophy vulnerable to the very statist tendencies she opposed. A consistent individualism recognizes that all coercion, including that exercised by the state, violates the principle of non-initiation of force. Markets have repeatedly demonstrated their capacity to provide complex public services, once deemed impossible without government. Law, security, and adjudication are unlikely to prove permanent exceptions. Thus we are led to anarcho-objectivism. Extending objectivism to its logical conclusion, polycentric order. The deepest strength of Rand's philosophy is its internal coherence across metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. When these foundations are followed without compromise, they lead beyond monarchism to a fully voluntary social order, what is commonly termed anarcho-capitalism or a polycentric legal system. This is not a rejection of objectivism, but its rigorous fulfillment. If reality is objective, reason is the sole means of knowledge, and each individual's life is an end in itself, then no institution may claim a monopoly on the use of force without violating the very principles Rand defended. The non-initiation of force principle, which he correctly identified as fundamental, cannot coexist with an entity that asserts the exclusive right to initiate force through taxation and compulsory jurisdiction. A minimal state, however constrained in theory, necessarily claims partial ownership over the lives and property of its subjects. It thereby treats individuals as a means to its own ends, the very inversion of egoism that Rand condemned in altruist collectivist systems. The market provision of security and law. Rand feared that competing defense agencies would devolve into warring factions, yet this objection applies the same static power-seeking model of human nature she otherwise rejected in her critique of statism. In a system grounded in rational self-interest, agencies that provide reliable, peaceful adjudication and protections would outcompete those that initiate aggression. Customers, exercising their own rational judgment, would patronize firms with transparent rules, low conflict costs, and strong reputations. Market discipline, profit and loss, creates ongoing incentives for de-escalation and standardization that a monopoly lacks. Private arbitration already demonstrates this in practice. International commerce routinely resolves complex, high-stakes disputes through bodies such as the International Chamber of Commerce or private firms like JAMS. Often faster and more predictably than state courts. Private security companies protect shopping centers, industrial parks, and affluent neighborhoods more effectively than many Private security companies protect shopping centers, industrial parks, and affluent neighborhoods more effectively than many public police forces, precisely because they are directly accountable to paying clients. Insurance companies, which internalize the costs of violence and fraud, would have powerful incentives to underwrite only reputable protection agencies and to mediate the interagency conflicts peacefully. Historical and theoretical work by thinkers such as Murray Rothbard, David Friedman, and Bruce Benson show that polycentric legal systems have functioned in various contexts, from medieval Icelandic commonwealths to merchant law in the Middle Ages to modern examples of voluntary governance in commercial enclaves. These systems generate law as an emergent discovery process. Rules evolve according to demonstrated need and mutual acceptability rather than legislative fiat. Addressing the objections critics of anarcho-capitalism often raise, the specter of a dominant agency becoming a de facto state. This possibility exists, but it is now addressing the objections critics of anarcho-capitalism often raise, the specter of a dominant agency becoming a de facto state. This possibility exists, but it is not unique to anarchy. States have repeatedly done exactly that. The decisive difference is exit and competition. A coercive monopoly that loses legitimacy faces no natural corrective mechanism. A private agency that overreaches loses customers, capital, and market share. Reputation, boycott, and the readiness of competing firms to serve disaffected clients serve as powerful checks. Rand's own epistemology supports this view. Knowledge, including institutional knowledge, advances through trial, error, and rational integration. A single monopoly on rights protection freezes this process at a single point and time and place, granting fallible bureaucrats final interpretive authority. A competitive order, by contrast, allows continuous experimentation and selection for superior rights protection mechanisms. Voluntary funding follows naturally. Protection, arbitration, and related services can be purchased directly, bundled with insurance, or financed through contractual subscriptions, much as individuals already purchase home security, legal counsel, and dispute resolution. No voluntary taxation oxymoron is required. Those who choose not to purchase protection bear the corresponding risk, consistent with rational self-interest. The objectivist paradox dissolves once the final status remnant is removed. Rand's metaphysics rejects the primacy of consciousness. Her epistemology rejects authority-based truth. Her ethics reject unchosen obligations. A consistent application yields a society in which all interactions rest on consent, where rights are defended through voluntary institutions, and where the only government that exists is self-government under objective law, discovered and enforced by market processes. This vision does not promise utopia. Human irrationality, error, and conflict would persist, yet it aligns institutional incentives with the nature of man as a rational volitional being. It removes the permanent temptation of legalized plunder that has corrupted every monarchist experiment in history. The dramatic expansion of state power in the 20th and 21st centuries, from modest constitutional limits to pervasive surveillance, regulation, and redistribution, illustrates the instability of the monarchist compromise. Rand's heroic creators in Atlas Shrugged withdrew their sanctions from a looter's regime. A fuller consistency would envision them building institutions that never require such withdrawal, because no agency possesses the coercive power to demand their sanction in the first place. I conclude that Ayn Rand remains a philosophical giant. Her uncompromising defense of reason, reality, and the sovereign individual rescued individualism from both conservative traditionalism and libertarian drift. Yet the logic of her own system presses forward. The same principles that make laissez-faire capitalism superior to mixed economies make polycentric voluntary law superior to even the most limited state. To embrace objectivism fully is to reject every form of initiated force, private or public, and to trust rational individuals acting in their self-interest, to build the protective and adjudicative institutions their lives require. The resulting order would be neither chaos nor utopia, but the only political expression consonant with man's nature, a society of free traders in values, ideas, and protection, bound solely by reason and consent. That is the logical conclusion of objectivism, and the unfinished task it leaves to those who would carry its torch.